Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to start by saying, when this came up initially, my first impression was, why was the timing, or why did we bring it up at this time? What was the motivation behind it? There's a lot of things that are brought up in the city for political motivation, and that may have all existed when these first resolutions came up, or to promote, a cause or somebody. I'm not going to pontificate on that. But when I sat down and educated myself on the history and the origin of some of these monuments that are in our public spaces, which are supposed to be welcoming for all, I came to the conclusion that the Robert E. Lee statue was a reminder of the discriminatory practices and racism that existed in Dallas's past, and it's now currently become a symbolism to white supremacy and neo-Nazism. It was erected in 1936 in the Jim Crow era. At the same time, some of our neighborhoods, even some of them in that vicinity, contained deed restrictions and repressive laws that didn't allow and put obstacles in front of African Americans and prevented equality. And it is the history of my city and the city that I love and the city that I'm here serving. And I'm not saying that we're going to erase that by a removal of a statue. We need to remember that history, but we need to also not, and it was for that reason that I came to the conclusion that this statue needed to come down. I am not saying we need to purge or erase. And the park's not going anywhere, and the green space is going to exist and be enjoyed and welcomed by all. And this resolution doesn't do that. And I commend Mr. Caraway, because he worked with a lot of us in editing this in this resolution to make sure it was limited to this statue. I think I'd like to hear from Mr. Brodnick on what it's actually going to cost, and we're not destroying it. And we're not tearing it down. We've worked to make sure that this is not a broad resolution. It still gives the task force a lot of authority to do their work and come back with recommendations for us. It doesn't call for anything associated with Confederacy to change at this time, the streets, but it does call for the Robert E. Lee. And I know it's a symbolic move, and it's not going to change, as Mr. Callahan so well pointed out. It's not going to change all opportunities, but sometimes we do symbolic things for the right reasons. And I'm going to share one, kind of a personal journey I've had during this process too. And I've been reminded by stories I've heard. My parents were not from Dallas, and they came here as quote unquote Yankees in 1969. But my dad and my mom both shared with me the concerns they had for some of the racism that exists in our city, and I think it was something they talked to us frequently about. And I'm going to share one story because it was somewhat offensive that a speaker here today tried to made an analogy to my own father and to Robert E. Lee, and maybe there is some analogies that could be made, but I was taught as a very young girl that you treat everybody equally, and my father shared a story with me that stuck forever about when he was a young officer in the Navy, and he was in a southern state, and he was eating at a diner with fellow other naval officers, and he was the waitress was treating them well and telling them they were great men, and on and on and on, and he thought they were nice, and back and forth, and then as they left and exited the restaurant, there was a window that you could walk up and order ice cream, and there was a young black boy standing there waiting in line to order his ice cream, and my dad's an ice cream lover, and he walked up to get some ice cream. And the lady immediately pushed the waitress, the same waitress that had treated him with all this respect, who he thought was a good person and who could have been a good person. But at the time, she pushed away the young child and said, and my dad and the other officers looked down and said, he was in front, take his order first. And he said, no, he's just a troublemaker. And then my dad said, no, well, we're going to buy him his ice cream. And he said, you're troublemakers too. And immediately called him a troublemaker for wanting to buy a young boy an ice cream. And I think it shaped him as a young man. I think I was a baby at the time. And it shaped the way he taught us how to treat people. And hearing those kind of stories, it weighed on my decision on, how we could, decide this vote. And I really, I'm very proud of my own representative, who I've done a lot of historical analogy or research on figuring out what the right thing to do regarding all these symbols. And I'm not, I thank Mr. Callaway for limiting it to this particular statue that we can protect. And it is a wonderful equestrian piece of artwork. We're not going to destroy it, and maybe it'll have a place in Dallas. But I just don't believe it has a place in a public park that is supposed to be enjoyed by all. So, and with that, this resolution, it is going to be limiting to that. I think we're going to have, I would like to hear from Mr. Brodnick on what the cost is going to be. I know we're giving him the authority just to take that piece up and spend that kind of money. But thank you for hearing me out. Thank you all. It has been actually a privilege to hear from everybody today. And I think there's going to continue to be, I think we've called for 2 more public hearings that we can continue to deal with this as a city and hopefully be able to come together. I love looking out at a diverse chamber and seeing all the people sitting next to each other that don't look alike. And maybe we can do more of that in the future in Dallas. So with that, if I could just have my question answered, I would appreciate it.